Good afternoon, Greg.
Good afternoon, Ninder. Very good to see you as well as hear you.
Yeah, well, listen, it's been a while since we met, and we'll go through how we met. But obviously, thank you very much for sparing the time.
Great pleasure.
We're in unprecedented times, we've heard. So it'd be interesting to get your take on where we are today and what does tomorrow look like. So now, what I've never done, Greg, since I've known you during my time at the local enterprise partnership, as you know, as a board member, I've just stepped down.
Absolutely.
And you were one of the architects in helping the Black country particularly really prosper well and get on its way. So thank you for that. But what I've never asked you during that time is, how did you get into politics? So tell me a bit about how you ended up sitting in front of us at the Black Country Lab. By the way, for those who don't know, the Black Country Lab is the Black Country Local Enterprise Partnership, which was set up by the government, Conservative government, to make sure that all the stakeholders, private and public, got together and did what was right for their region. And we'll chat about your involvement. So how did you get in, Greg, into politics?
Well, it's a long time ago now, but I was born and bred in the northeast of England, in Middlesbrough. And I come from a small business background. My dad was a milkman, and sort of growing up, and this was an area that was very sort of traditional. It had some similarities with the Black country in the sense that, you know, a lot of the industries in which had driven its prosperity, some of them had disappeared, some of them were going through challenges. And so when I was a kid in the 1980s, it was quite a tough time. Unemployment was very high. I went to the local comprehensive school, and you know, a lot of my friends' dads were unemployed at that time, and it was quite tough. And one of the things that struck me at the time was that at a time and a place where I thought education was really important in equipping people with the knowledge and skills to be able to get jobs that would help them, given that there weren't so many around locally. It was very uncommon to even go into the sixth form, let alone university. Now, we've got a division bell. I don't know whether you can hear me okay or whether we need to pause.
That's fine. Listen, carry on.
Actually, okay, well, I'm in the House of Commons.
It gives it a nice taste.
So one of the things that got me thinking was, you know, most people left school at 16.
Yeah.
And they weren't going into jobs at 16. They were often going straight into unemployment. And I thought, yeah, this is crazy. We should be shaking this up. And because this was an area that, you know, was Labour dominated, I thought there was a kind of complacency there that they hadn't really spotted that there were lots of kids, you know, like me and people in my class that should be given more opportunities and perhaps given a bit more pressure to stay on in education, to do A-levels, and perhaps to get to university as I did. And that is essentially a political thought. It was a kind of critique of what I thought was, you know, a degree of complacency that was there, wanting to do something about it. And so that whet my appetite. So I became involved in politics when I went to university. I became politically involved there. First of all, with the SDP, which you might recall at the time was a new party that was established in the early 1980s. But then that didn't last very long, and by the time the SDP disappeared, I could recognise that what motivated me and where I felt most at home was in the Conservative Party.
And before we move on, how did those who saw you grow up in a largely Labour area, how did they react to you being on the other side?
Well, if I say, you know, staying on into the sixth form and go to university was comparatively unusual, then getting involved in politics was even more unusual. And so I think they thought this was a bit eccentric, a bit, you know, Most other people are probably playing football on the weekends rather than delivering leaflets and knocking on doors. But I had a bit of practice in that aspect of it, because I said my dad was a milkman, and so all through my mid-teens, Thursday and Friday night, I was literally knocking on doors, asking for the milk money, doing the collecting round, as we call it. And that's actually pretty good training for politics, Ninder, because you can't just knock on the door and demand the money. You have to have a little chat with them, and you kind of find out what's on people's minds, and so you get used to talking to people, and I enjoyed doing that, and so I had a bit of training for that as well.
Wow, fascinating! I had absolutely no idea. So now I understand the route into politics, and then of course you came into the Black country, as you did with other parts of the country, by putting something called an industrial strategy together. So tell me, what was the industrial strategy? What was its purpose? And was it flawed maybe from the start, and as a result, it was never going to go anywhere, or is it now been a mistake? I don't know what people say in our part of the neck of the woods, it's a mistake, but perhaps you could start with the rationale behind the industrial strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a pretty simple rationale. It's that, for anyone that works in a company viewing this, it seems to me that any organization should be looking to the future and seeing how they can not just survive, but they can prosper in that future. Things are changing, probably in technology, things are changing at a more rapid pace than perhaps since the first industrial revolution, in which the Black country was prominent. And so to look ahead, reflect on what your strengths are, map them against where demand is going to be, what are the sort of products and goods and services that people are going to want in the future, see whether you're in a position to provide them, see what you need to do in terms of investing in your capabilities, whether that's in skills or whether it's in research and development, or whether it's in facilities. Make sure that you're equipped for that. That seems a sensible step to take. And what I think about it in this way: if you were a shareholder at the annual general meeting of a company, and it came to kind of questions to the board, and someone asked a question, said, "What's the strategy for the future?" And if the chairman or the chief executive said, "Well, we don't know really, we thought we'd just kind of play it by ear, see how things go," I don't think anyone would be very impressed. And I don't think they should be very impressed if the Prime Minister or the Business Secretary or the Chancellor had to say that. So I think having a view of the future and looking to know what you need to do to be able to prosper and to make the most of your talents and your assets is something that I think all governments should do. And so I think it was and is the right thing to do. Sometimes these are called different things, and it doesn't need to have the words industrial strategy on it, as long as people are addressing the content, which is to prepare well for the future. That is fine. But a big part of that was the local and the regional strategies as well. Because my view, and you wouldn't be surprised to hear this from someone that's born and bred in Middlesbrough, place matters, and every place is different. And prosperity doesn't happen in the abstract. You might have the numbers in the Chancellor's budget every year, but every one of those numbers, the contribution to national income, the people employed, they happen in real places, not in the ether. And so just as you should try and make the country as good a place as possible for business and for enterprise and for people to be successful, so I think you should do that locally as well. And so the work that we did in the Black country, and I was very enormously grateful for your service in doing that. The only people that can really give that lead are people like you, Ninder, who are local, who know the place inside out. And so a part of a national industrial strategy is very much to have a big place for local areas.
So Listen, I think that makes eminent sense. So the word industrial strategy has now disappeared. So what do you think it's been replaced by? Because obviously those on the right wing of politics will say, well, actually, government should retrench. Government should let people just get on with it, and get businesses get on with it. So in that respect, it was quite innovative to come up with a business industrial strategy, because there wasn't one for a while. So if it hasn't been dropped, what is it called now, so that people can still identify an industrial strategy? Because one of the things I know about you, Greg, was you were very visible. You were very visible, and certainly in the Black Country, you were popping over so many times, and it was apparent that there was definitely a strategy in place, because you were leading it from the front, and it was, honestly, it really was very visible. And other LEP areas said the same, so it wasn't just us. So it was obvious there was a strategy because you were leading it. Now, if there is one now, what does it look like, and who's leading it?
Well, it's kind of you to say what you said, and I love coming to the Black Country and love coming to the West Midlands. I once worked it out during the 3 years that I was the Secretary of State for Business. I was in the West Midlands on average every 3 weeks during that whole three years, and I was in the Black Country a lot, and that was because that's where things happen. You know, there's no point sort of staying in Whitehall and just reading briefs and papers about what's going on. You want to see for yourself, and you want to sit down, as we did many times, with local business and civic leaders and university leaders to work together. So that was very much my approach, and I think this idea that government should just be completely absent and not participate and just leave it to businesses to sink or swim, as it were. Now, obviously, as a Conservative, and coming from a small business background, I believe in competition, and business needs to have that. But if you think about some of the ways in which we have and will prosper, a lot of it comes from scientific research, for example, spin-outs from universities. They tend to be, in every country in the world, including such capitalist economies as America, a lot of public funds go into universities. So it makes sense to coordinate that with business, it seems to me. Things like transport. I mean, in the West Midlands and the Black Country in particular, you need to be connected in order to prosper. And it's usually the government that makes decisions about roads and all the rest of things. So I think the government should be active and visible and prominent and know really well all of the people in all of the areas and work together on a joint plan. So you ask what's replaced the industrial strategy. I mean, as I sort of implied in my previous answer, it may not be called the industrial strategy, but I hope that the fundamentals are there, and actually I think they are. So one part of the industrial strategy was to invest more in research and development, because it seems to be, just as in the Industrial Revolution, it's kind of discovery and invention and innovation and the application of new innovations that are going to help us prosper. Well, actually, the government's made a big commitment to that. The science budget, the government science budget, is going to double during the course of this Parliament. Enormous, the biggest increase we've ever had. I very much hope, and you and I both know Andy Street very well. We worked with him as the Mayor of the West Midlands, that focus on place will continue. In fact, the government calls it levelling up, but it's the same analysis of the industrial strategy, is to make sure that those places that have been behind some of the others but have great potential realise that potential. So the elements are there. There's a thing called the Plan for Growth that was published at the same time as the budget. The government was elected only a couple of months before COVID hit. So I think it's not surprising that the spotlight that I and Theresa May and others were able to kind of shine on industrial strategy I can understand why that hasn't been possible. And in terms of coming to visits, it's literally been impossible for ministers to get out and about the way that I did. But I hope now we're coming out of COVID, that there will be that real energy and visible commitment to making industrial strategy work, whatever they choose to call it.
Well, if the new people in the business want to do even half of what you do, they'll have done well, because you were very visible. So picking up the importance of place and the importance of levelling up, I'm just going to read out a quote from the CEO of the Black Country Museum. And he said, is the pandemic and the government's ambition to level up making place-based development more enticing and the way to go? And I know you've talked about that. I'm the chair of the Wolverhampton Towns Fund, and we just received £25 million. And we're looking now for the Levelling Up Fund as well. So you've said brilliantly that place is important. All of this sort of emphasises that. But what else can we do? What more can we do to rebalance the economy and to make levelling up even more tangible than these sort of pockets of money? And by the way, thank you to the government for supporting the visitor economy. Certainly the museum in the Black Country, they received quite a bit. I know the Hippodrome in Birmingham, and I know various other places as well. So thanks for that. But so what more can we do to rebalance the economy?
Well, I think we can do a lot more. But the first thing is, as you say, to observe that it is a very important message and theme of this government. And actually, again, I look back quite proudly on the fact that the town deals, the first town deal was in the industrial strategy. We, in fact, we launched the idea of deals. It started with city deals and growth deals that created the West Midlands Mayoralty. And I was very keen that they should apply to towns as well. And I got enormous resistance from this in Whitehall at the time. And I included a commitment to town deals in the industrial strategy right at the last minute. In fact, I inserted it into the proofs of the printer because the Treasury wouldn't let me mention it, but I managed to insert a reference to a pilot town deal to be negotiated with Grimsby. And knowing full well that once you've done that, then there'd be no stopping it. And I'm delighted that it's extended right across the country now. What do you need to do? I mean, local leadership is the most important thing in my view. The old style, which was literally the case, that people in departments in central London would be deciding about kind of road junctions in Wolverhampton and Dudley, when sometimes the officials, no criticism of them, had never been there before. Those sort of decisions should be taken by people who know inside out and know that if only you kind of solve this bottleneck, then actually this piece of land could come into play and it would make a brilliant manufacturing facility, and it would link into to this cluster of other manufacturers. You need that local knowledge, and so I'm unashamed in wanting to push further the devolution agenda and have more decisions taken locally. I think the research and innovation and science agenda is also very important, because we are a very centralized country. Centralized actually not on the centre of England where the Black Country broadly is, but on a corner of the country, on the southeast corner. And in my view, we should try to recognise the opportunities that there are elsewhere. And in research and development, if you take universities, for example, actually most of our universities are outside the southeast, and in all of our great cities and regions, you've got really strong universities that are, and you know this through the LEP, big parts of the leadership of their local economy. So that's a good and important way of doing it.
Now, in the industrial strategy, which was well put together, it talked about partnerships a lot.
Yeah.
And with the new town deals and the levelling up, I couldn't quite grip onto the partnership. Where's the partnership element there? Because it seems to be that it's all just going to the council or the LEP area and just get on with it. Whereas before, there was always an element in the industrial strategy. We were very, very cleverly put together. It talked about partnerships all the time and collaboration and scale.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe I missed it. So is that right?
No, I think that is right. And the industrial strategy was put together in partnership. We spent a year taking it around the country. I did round tables. We did them right across the West Midlands, including in the Black Country. And you and others through the LEPs and others helped shape it. So it was a product of partnership. Yeah. And I think that's the way of the world, especially in business. I mean, you know personally, and probably most of your viewers will know, that in business these days, you're involved in partnerships with your suppliers, with your customers. Often, if you take retail, for example, if you're kind of Marks and Spencer or Sainsbury's or Tesco or whatever, you've literally got people working in your suppliers on quality and processes. The idea that you just kind of sort of buy in a kind of marketplace without any idea of where your suppliers are coming from is the old world. Everyone works together, and it seems to me that we should do it in this way, and the government should work together with councils, with local enterprise partnerships, with business groups, business organizations, chambers of commerce. That's what we should do, and I hope that will be the case.
In terms of the West Midlands and looking forward, and certainly the rest of the country, the Americans, Tesla, have sort of led the way with sort of battery and electric, and of course, JLR just recently said, yes, we're going electric as well. So a couple of things. Are we now playing catch up? And if we're playing catch up, how can the government help? Are we ready? The government's hit a target of 2030 to see the end of what we call the internal combustion engine.
Yeah.
And you do sit here and you wonder, well, crikey, that's only, 9 years away. So are we ready? What can the government do? Do we have the infrastructure actually in place to even do it? Because there's a lot to do before we can completely get rid of the engine.
Mm.
So, and where are these bits going to come from? So really, what role can government play? Because it's set that deadline, isn't it, 2030?
Yeah.
And it looks very tight to me. So how can government ensure that happens certainly in terms of infrastructure? How can we get there? Because otherwise, it just looks a bit daunting to me.
So I agree with you, Ninder. It's a big challenge that we need to join forces in, and the government has a big role to play in that. I think it's the right challenge. Again, when we wrote the industrial strategy, one of the big investments was into what we call the Faraday challenge, which was to make Britain a leading centre for the development of new battery technology, because it seemed to be not a gamble, but a kind of certainty that was going to be important in the future. And so both in the research and in the pure scientific research, but also in manufacturing technology. And we've got by Coventry at the Warwick University, there's a battery industrialization center that is there to show how you can manufacture batteries. And then, of course, all of the motor companies that we've got and their suppliers, components manufacturers, need to be geared for this transition. So I think the government should be partners in that, and we are, through the Faraday Challenge, helping advance prototyping and research. But you're absolutely right, there needs to be the infrastructure to support it, and we do need to, I think, accelerate the charging point network that we have around the country. And that has to be done in advance of 2030, because it's a bit of a chicken and egg. I mean, a lot of people won't buy an electric vehicle if they think that there aren't enough charging points to be able to reliably charge it. So you want to give people the confidence that, if I buy an electric vehicle, there's no problem at all charging it, because the government's put in put on in these charging points, or partnered with others in putting in the charging points. So I think that needs to be a big consequence of having committed to this 2030 decision to roll out, to phase out internal combustion engines. I think arising from that is a need to invest in the network.
Yeah, I think also at the moment, I think most of these cars are quite expensive. So we're hoping by the time 2030 comes, they'll be similar to what internal combustion engine. But you're right.
That's true. I mean, as you know, Ninder, they tend to come down. They obviously, they started off niche, they're expanding, and when you go from small production to volume manufacturing, then costs come down, and that, I think, is something we can look forward to. And the running costs are much cheaper than petrol and diesel vehicles.
So a couple of things in terms of manufacturing. Do you think by 2030 we'll be self-reliant rather than relying on imports? Will we have battery power factories here churning them out? Because I mean that's going to be also a big challenge, and we learned that with COVID. If you're relying on overseas supplies, then it's very difficult.
Well, up to a point, Ninder, I don't think we should be. I don't think we should aspire to complete self-reliance in things, because if every country did that, we'd have no export market. And as you and I know, the slogan of the Black Country LEP is made in the Black Country, sold around the world. And I want the Black Country's products to be sold around the world for many years to come. So I believe in trade. I think we all do better from trade. So I wouldn't want to, put up the shutters against import and export. And actually, the vaccines are a case in point. I think we need to have resilience. And we need to make sure that if you have disruptions, we're not completely sunk by that. And in vaccine manufacturing, we didn't have enough domestic capacity. But a lot of it is international. I mean, many of the different components, if I can put it that way, of the vaccines come from different countries across the world. And that's always going to be the case in, it seems to be, most products. Things are complex, and you'll get specialist producers. And as long as you've got a diversity of it, then I think we should be open to the world. And as I say, looking to export many of our components to the world.
Well, staying on that theme around manufacturing, as you know, the West Midlands, its manufacturing base got wiped out during the 90s. There are some people saying, well, that was market economies and Thatcher was right to do what she did. Other people say, no. We shouldn't, the whole region shouldn't have disappeared up the north. They sort of got abandoned. And of course, in the Black Country and those areas where manufacturing was key, losing the manufacturing advisory service was quite critical. But look, going forward then, and I know Biden's coming a lot more conciliatory now. You saw the worst of the worst during COVID because everybody shut up their borders and people became very nationalistic. And then we had the rumpus with the EU because they said you can't have export, the whole of that kerfuffle. And of course, people then, and of course, we were all, not just us, the whole world was suspended when the ship got stuck in the Suez Canal. And you suddenly saw people saying, well, globalization, maybe not quite there. Do you think we should be, I mean, back to the sort of industrial strategy type of thing, do you think we should be placing more emphasis on encouraging a manufacturing base, notwithstanding what you said about import-export, but, there were a lot of lessons we learned about having to rely on other people.
No, I do agree that we should have a big focus on manufacturing. And although you're right, and obviously you as a local have experienced this directly, there was a big contraction of manufacturing in the 1990s. It wasn't total, and some of the groups and companies that survived that, JLR being an obvious example, have now been hugely important for the whole country as a result. And I've visited the privilege of visiting countless manufacturing firms across the Black Country and across the West Midlands that either have continued, some of them many years old, and many new startups. And so I think that manufacturing tradition, I hope, will be revived. I think there is a recognition now that it is very important. Let me give you an example. We all are going to relying more on GPS, whether it's on our phones for on maps or kind of controlling devices, monitoring crops in Africa and all the rest of things. Globally, we're using satellites more. Satellites have to be manufactured, and we are pretty good in this country at manufacturing satellites, especially small satellites. And a lot of the aerospace skills that we have, not least in the West Midlands, there's a ready and booming market for satellites. So I'm very optimistic for manufacturing. I don't think we'll be in a kind of post-manufacturing world. In fact, I think there'll be a revival for reasons of resilience, but also of innovation. I think some of these jobs that went overseas are starting to come back, and we should be there, especially working in conjunction with universities and colleges and research institutions to expand that. So I hope we'll do that, and I think we should very explicitly have a pro-manufacturing strategy.
Just an observation, and completely out of your remit, but I'm going to make the observation. It's around skills and education.
Yes.
And you do feel sometimes that the education system hasn't caught up with this real world that you've been speaking about, the technology side and the personal skills and everything. And I think, and again, I'm not saying it's because you're talking on the other side of the screen, whilst it was easy to talk to people like you, the business department was a lot more open. The experience we find is the education department is pretty enclosed and never really reaches that. And I'm sure there's a great job with schools, but never quite connected with business. And I think that's an area we do need to explore. Business will tell you across the country that the education is not quite what we're looking for in terms of new skills for the future.
Well, that's an important reflection of strategy as well. So we talked about one aspect of strategy, which is thinking about the future and preparing for it. You know, as you know, anyone working in business will know that there's another sense of strategy, which is bringing all the strands together so that they, you know, you kind of you've got a stronger chord as a result. And sometimes it is the case that different policies pull literally in different directions. And you're absolutely right that education has to reinforce and to support the opportunities that are there. And you know, we are undergoing a huge technological revolution at the moment, and education needs to keep pace with that, it seems to me.
Yeah. Just looking at COP26 coming up in November, and again, we're talking about manufacturing and energy. And of course, there's much discussion around carbon and carbon neutral and how the UK is leading the way and wants to show the world that, you know, we're really into making sure the energy is right. But of course, it's a bit difficult to get that message across when, notwithstanding what Biden said very recently, China and India are certainly still polluters. And I remember I looked at the stat. I think in terms of pollution, we're about 17th down the table. So, you know, we're doing a good job already.
Yeah.
And whilst 16 countries above us are polluting like crazy, and if we continue on that track of leading the way, then some of our businesses are going to be at a competitive disadvantage because we're putting all these things into place, which is all costing money. So I'm just wondering, what can we do? And are we right to be, you know, really being on the front foot because we're worried about carbon? I mean, Crowe Whitehall are a fantastic firm just around the corner, and they're a managing partner for the Midlands. Jonathan Dudley said, are we better mining coal and other raw materials rather than buying in from other countries just so that we have to reduce carbon? So, you know, there is a balance. You almost get the impression other people sort of, I wouldn't say ignoring it, but they're not going as strong as the UK. And is that a worry because it is placing us at a competitive disadvantage?
Well, I should disclose that one of my last acts as the business secretary was to bring in the legislation that committed us to net zero, and so I'm strongly supportive of it. And one of the reasons is this, Ninder, that actually I think you've got to look at it in a kind of dynamic way. And you mentioned two countries, big countries, China and the United States, and their record. Actually, just in the last few years, you're seeing a big change there. So China, for whatever reason, has decided to change its position and now wants to be very, very front foot when it comes to green technologies and reducing emissions. In fact, in terms of electric vehicles, China is now one of the, not just the big markets, but big competitive threats there. So we don't want to be left behind in that sense. And in America, obviously, Trump took America out of the Paris Agreement. Biden has put them very strongly in. So I get a sense that the world is moving very strongly in that direction, and there will be important economic opportunities as well. Take offshore wind, for example. We backed offshore wind quite early on, and now we're the world leader in offshore wind, and it's creating lots of jobs. When I was Secretary of State, I had the pleasure and the honour of opening the Siemens wind turbine factory in Hull on the banks of the Humber River there, employing over 1,000 people in highly skilled jobs, and exporting to the rest of the world. So I think there will be opportunities there. There will be in batteries and electric vehicles. But if we don't act on it, and if we sort of act as kind of King Canute and think that the tide's not going to come in, then I think we risk being inundated and drowned. And better to strike out strongly in the direction that the world is going. Again, this comes back to strategy, thinking about the future. And it seems to me that the future is going to be more green rather than more polluting in the future. And so best to prepare to be one of the people that benefit from manufacturing and servicing those new technologies.
So taking that as sort of going forward, and we've talked about now batteries looking forward. We've talked about carbon zero looking forward. Now let's look at trade and sort of global trade, and vis-a-vis the UK. So let's look at where we are now before we sort of look at what tomorrow looks like.
Yeah,
there's a patchy start to COVID. The government seemed, I think, like most of the world, wasn't quite sure how to cope with this.
Yeah.
We'll know whether mistakes were made or not, but the reality is it's been a brilliant vaccine rollout, absolutely brilliant vaccine rollout. The rates of infections is down, hospitalization is down, deaths is down. And of course, amongst all this, we had Brexit. We've seen issues at the borders, big issues at the borders, particularly in January, where there were real big supply problems as well. We've seen the advantage of not being part of the EU, because not being part of the medical agency meant we could move very quickly on vaccines, whereas I think the EU was sort of behind. So it's a mixed picture, good bits, bad bits. So now looking forward, particularly as hopefully the roadmap now becomes even more crystal clear, and as we sort of start to return to normality, what does global Britain mean, and where does post-Brexit leave the UK in terms of our position now in the world?
Well, very good and important questions, Ninder. And in terms of your analysis of where we've got to, I think I broadly agree with that. I think it was quite difficult at first for any country to know what to do, and every country is different. We're so internationally connected, and that's a good thing. That, some people say, well, New Zealand did better. Nothing against New Zealand, but it's a very different type of country and economy, a long way from most places, than a country that is literally a crossing point of the world. But I do think some important strategic decisions were made, such as producing and ordering at risk multiple versions of vaccines. So a very interesting case study of industrial strategy, actually, to kind of prepare for the future, not put all your eggs in one basket, lean in, government working with universities, with pharmaceutical companies and others. So lots of lessons from that. I hope and expect that we're going to come out of it strongly. And because COVID followed pretty hard on the heels of of Brexit, at least in terms of having the free trade agreement, the trade and cooperation agreement, now is a chance to act on it, it seems to me. And just as you pointed out, there's no point leaving the EU and then doing everything identically to what you did when you were in it. We have to make use of these powers. We can, talking about a partnership with industries and companies, we can be much more agile in our investments in scientific research, for example. There used to be, and I was the minister that had to deal with it, a huge bureaucracy. If you wanted to put money even into universities that were partnering with businesses for some research and development, you had to fill in forms, you had to notify it to the Commission, the European Commission. Sometimes they said no, sometimes they wanted the money to be repaid. Now it gives us the ability to, across these very exciting areas, to be really kind of bust the bureaucracy, to be very agile and more fleet of foot than a big organization with 26 member states like the European Union can be. So we should do that. Trade agreements. I'm pleased that we've got a trade agreement with the European Union because that's our biggest market. But we should now have trade agreements with others, and we should be proactively looking for opportunities to export around the world and still exercising world leadership. And you will know, and your colleagues in the Black Country will know, that in manufacturing, sometimes standards are very important. The specification of products, and often there are global standards, and that's something that we have historically been and are very good at. And so I hope we'll be very out there and proactive in helping take our expertise to shape international standards, which then can create opportunities for Britain. So I think we need to be vigorous. I think we need to be confident. I think we need to be agile. We need to be entrepreneurial and look for opportunities and go after them, and have a real sense of energy to make the most of the new freedoms that we've got.
Well, what do you think, honestly, is our likelihood of getting a deal with the US? Is that likely? I know there's patches of treaties being done, but business will say to me, we still fear about prices. We still fear that things haven't been really cottoned down yet, and there's a few more surprises to come. And Biden's in, and are we important enough? And in fact, now that we're on our own, do we have a real voice itself within the world now? And are we a smaller nation? And of course, people in pharmaceuticals were worried about the science side and working together. So, what do you think? I mean, there's particularly the American thing. I mean, we're looking to try and get into America with our magazine, and so I'm just anticipating the complications of trying to do deals with America. And
so, obviously, deals with big companies, with big countries, I should say, are always going to be challenging because there's so many different aspects to them. There's agriculture, for example, that has to be included in a deal that involves manufactured goods and perhaps services as well. So I'm sure it'll be hard, but everything I pick up sitting here in Parliament from colleagues in government is that there's very good will from the United States towards us. And actually this, as you sort of implied, can have a dividend before a very comprehensive trade agreement. So, for example, not as much manufactured in the Black Country, but Scotch whisky is something that there were tariffs against, and actually they've been lifted. And that is good, and it's very important for quite a lot of jobs in Scotland. So it shows that it doesn't need to be, all or nothing. You can make progress in particular sectors, in particular fields. Actually, aerospace is another one in which the restrictions have been reduced. So I hope we will be able to make progress towards a trade deal, and it may involve faster progress on particular sectors. But beyond that, I think we've got to, as I say, we've got to use our freedom. So one of the things in the past was that when we negotiated with other countries in the world, it was as a member state of the EU. They were basically negotiating with the EU. And so we haven't had to set out our wares and to negotiate directly. Now we have to do that. I think that's a good opportunity for us.
Final comment and question, really. You're in the centre there. You see things every day. What's going on around the country, around the world. What does it look like in terms of COVID now? Well, what's your sense of where you think the country's going? The economists have said we're looking at a bump of 6% growth, I think, this year. Yeah. Probably one of the fastest recoveries we've ever had. So what's your sense? You're there every day. You're getting all this information about not only this country, but internationally. So a couple of things to finish off. Where do you think we're going as a country now then, post-COVID? What are the sort of the big changes? And how do you think the global trading place will change? Have we changed as people? And have countries changed as a result of COVID?
So I'm very optimistic about our prospects post-COVID. I chair the Science and Technology Committee in Parliament, and we take evidence most weeks on COVID from the scientists in this country around the world. The vaccines seem to be effective, and as we both know, we've rolled them out at an incredible pace across the country. And I think that is going to mean that infection levels, which are falling, will fall further, and we'll be able safely to get back to not normal in the sense that we won't forget this, and people have gone through a lot, and some people have lost loved ones, but we'll bounce back. It seems to me, and that is when all said and done, the most important thing was that we were able to develop and deploy a vaccine as soon as it was available, and I think we could scarcely have done better on that, and I think that's really important. And although many of your colleagues and friends would have suffered a lot in business terms, and personally in terms of their own incomes during the pandemic, getting back to the experience of growth, whether it's 5%, 6%, or whatever, that will feel pretty buoyant, pretty optimistic. And we all know, when everyone's smiling, then it's infectious. And I think, if people are going back to work, people are spending money again, people are placing orders, people are hiring people, hopefully it's a kind of virtuous circle, and we can do really well over the next few years. I really hope that. Internationally, that's where I think there might be some more challenges. Obviously, at the time we're talking, this awful situation in India is bad and getting worse. Very sadly, it's going to be several months probably until the level of vaccination that we've been able to get to is going to be achieved in India, and there are many countries in the world like that. So I think that we are probably going to do better than the world as a whole, because we are advantaged in terms of the vaccines, I think that has two responsibilities. One is that we need to redouble our efforts to help other countries with our expertise and advice, and indeed our vaccines, to help them get out of it. I also think that in international terms, we've had a difficult few years in which, the demeanor of the American administration has not been terribly encouraging of free trade and international cooperation. I think that's peaked, and actually there will be more of a kind of international agreements and conversations, and perhaps not always easy conversations, but I think they'll take place. And I hope that we'll be a leader in that, because we've got a voice. We've always had a strong voice. We're a member of the Security Council of the United Nations. We're one of the biggest economies in the world. But we were constrained by being a member of the EU. We couldn't always give our own view where it was a collective view of the European Union. Now we can, and I hope that we will use that vigorously.
So do you think globalization, I mean, a lot of people said during COVID, globalization is finished. And certainly in the previous America First policy, globalization was finished. But from what you're saying, globalization is far from finished.
Well, the COVID pandemic shows you that globalization is not finished, because it's a global disease that started in China and hit us for 6. And it's a metaphor in some ways that you can't, in the 21st century, think that you can isolate yourself from the rest of the world and are not going to be embroiled in global forces. And it's just impossible. I mean, there isn't a country in the world, as far as I can see, that has, however isolated, has managed to put up the defences to stop COVID coming in. And so I think that's the case with globalization. Because what we mean by globalization is that there'll be companies and businesses that will develop products in one country, perhaps ahead of another, and people in other countries will want those products, and that's a good thing. We shouldn't. I don't think we should be concerned about that. In fact, I think we should be confident about it. I think we should be looking, and the Prime Minister uses the slogan "Global Britain." We should be looking to exert our trading strengths in that. We make fantastic things. We have high reputation for high quality, whether that's in manufactured goods or whether it's in services. We've got a reputation for innovation, for brilliance, for creativity. All of these things, I think the world is going to want more of in the next few years. And if you think about some of the industries, we talked about satellites earlier on. Satellites are bound to expand. Healthcare, life sciences, all of the work behind the discovery of the vaccine, the development of the vaccine, genomics, looking at the sequencing of genetic material. All of these things, huge demands for, and we have a leading position in that. So I think we should be looking to be on the front foot and to be exporting around the world in a very active and confident way.
So, Greg, we've been speaking for an hour. Let me just 55 minutes. Let me just remind you of what we've covered. We covered devolvement, in other words, let local people decide.
Yeah.
Let local knowledge prevail. We've talked about the importance of place. We looked at the industrial strategy and how that's changed, and whilst in its essence, it's still something we should pursue. We looked at the importance of manufacturing, and we looked at the importance of R&D. Life science, you gave an example. We spoke about skills. We also spoke about net zero carbon. We spoke about how the economy now, whilst it was behind everyone else initially when the virus hit us, we were really struggling as an economy. It's now in front of everybody else because of the vaccine side. we talked about globalization and how now that looks like it will get even more integrated, particularly with the change of leadership, and how I think COVID has taught us that maybe if we all as a world work together, we're probably all going to prosper together. We're very optimistic in terms of the UK's economy, 6% growth, and it's changing place on the global trade. And of course, this encapsulates the type of chap you were when we used to know you, which was open, transparent, and very confident. And I think that was my experience of working with you there. And that's exactly how you've come across. It's been brilliant talking to you, Greg, and I hope to catch up with you again soon. But it was brilliant, those 9 years working with you, and I wish you the best in everything else you're doing in the heart of government, and still placing, from what I can see, the role of business at the top of the tree.
100%, Ninder. And listen, I'm really grateful for the chats and for having the opportunity to spend some virtual time together. The work that you and your colleagues did during that time in the Black Country, I think I really enjoyed, but it's made a big difference to people. One of the reasons that I enjoyed coming up to the region such a lot was that there was a real sense of kind of momentum, that people were thinking that better days were ahead again, and a sense of possibility and optimism and strength there that I know very much is still there. So I hope it won't be very many weeks now before I can come back up, and we'll see each other again in person. But thank you for everything you did. When I said local leadership, it can't happen without local leadership. You were and are one of those local leaders, and so it's the other way around. I should be thanking you for what you've done.
And I think it was a wonderful touch hearing the bell in the background. I think that just gives the podcast a bit of atmosphere. Greg, thanks very much for taking that time.
Great pleasure.
And I look forward to catching with you soon. Thank you.
Fantastic. Look forward to that.